Okay, thank you. So yesterday we started the training yesterday, and with the set up our environment, which the yesterday training was mainly to set up our environment. The first thing we did yesterday was to set up our AWS account that we're going to be using for this training. Then after we set up the AWS account, we download and install Terraform. So after we set up our Terraform and we see that the Terraform is working, we tested it with Terraform dash version, or you can also test it with Terraform -v, and we saw that that one was working. Then we go ahead to download and install the text editor that we're going to be using for this training, which is VS Code. There are some other options that you can use, but I prefer the VS Code because that is what I have been using for years now. Also, after we download the VS Code and install it, we also install Terraform extension for VS Code, which make the writing of Terraform scripts make it more easier than if you don't have an extension. So also we look at the Terraform documentation briefly, but we are still going to continue looking at the Terraform documentations today, and throughout this training, we are going to be using Terraform documentation for the whole training. Also yesterday, we tried our hands on the first Terraform project, which we were unable to complete because of access issue. So we're going to rectify that today, if possible, or we just start afresh. So for today's training, we are going to continue with, this is day 2 of the training. If you missed day 1, please go and watch it. We are going to add it in the link below, or you go to our playlist, you will see the first day of the training there. So it's better to watch the first training to set up your environment so that you can flow along with us. So on today's training, we are going to start looking at Terraform files, Terraform configuration files. Terraform has a lot of files, and if you do not create the file in the right way, you might end up having issue with your Terraform scripts. So that is the first thing we are going to look at, different kind of or different types of Terraform files that we have. Different types of Terraform files. Then after that, we are going to look at authentications and authorization in Terraform. How do you authenticate in Terraform? There are multiple means of authenticating in Terraform and authorization. It's always good to know the different ways that you can authenticate in Terraform, because if you are only used to a particular means of authentication in Terraform, I have seen some people that they always put the code, the credentials directly in their code. This is not advisable, but it works. So the reason why he wants to learn multiple means is that you might go to a particular, or you might get a job in a particular place that they will not allow you to use the means that you know how to use, or your company might give you a laptop that is not allowing you to do one particular means of authentication that you know. That is why you always want to learn variety or multiple different way of authenticating. After that, we are going to start working with the providers, which is a plugin for the cloud provider that he wants to use. Terraform supports a lot of providers, a lot of applications. So the only way for you to specify to Terraform that this is the application that I want to use, or this is the application that I want to use Terraform for, is by specifying the provider. And I'm going to show you how to embed or configure the provider's file. And after that, we look at the resource block. Terraform has a lot of resource block. We have the resource block, we have output block, we have module blocks. We are going to look at all of these blocks throughout this training. But the block that we are going to look at today is called the resource block. And this is the fundamental block in Terraform, apart from the providers block. And finally, for today, we are going to start getting our hands dirty by looking at some basic Terraform commands. These 4 commands, the Terraform init, Terraform plan, Terraform apply, and destroy. These are the very first 4 commands that you want to know whenever you want to start writing Terraform. And most of the interview those of the interview that you do, these are the first thing, these are parts of the main Terraform command they will ask you if they at all want to ask you about Terraform command that you know. All right, without further ado, let's get started. So let's start talking about the Terraform files that we have. Understanding Terraform files. The first Terraform file that you want to understand or you want to know is the Terraform file that ends with .tf. The Terraform file that ends with .tf, and this is the main Terraform file where you put your configuration. Anything you want to deploy to the cloud, you have to put it in a particular file, and this file ends with .tf. So let's go ahead and create our first Terraform file. It's always good to name it whatever you want. And you can, one thing about Terraform is that you can put all your Terraform code in single file, in one single file, but this is not advisable. It's always better to split out your Terraform in multiple different files. For instance, if you want to deploy, use Terraform to deploy an S3 bucket, which is a service on AWS, or you want to, and you also want to use that same Terraform to deploy an EC2, I want to use Terraform to deploy a VPC, which is a networking in AWS. All of this, you can put all the three configuration, you can put their configuration code in the same file, but this is not advisable. It's always better to put them in a different file. So let's go ahead and create our first Terraform file. So this one, I'm going to, the first Terraform file that we are going to do, or the first Terraform deployment that we're going to do, we're going to put all the code in the same configuration. Then after that, we will start separating them to their own file, to their own different file. So the first one is, let's create terraform.tf. So this is a Terraform file where you put your code, your configurations. Whatever thing that you want to deploy, this is where you write the code. You put them in this file. If you don't save it in terraform.tf file, if you put it in another command, another extension, Terraform will not recognize it. So that is that. The second file that we will look at today is what is called terraform.tfvars. Or you just name it .tfvars. It not necessarily mean you name it terraform.tfvars. It's just going to be .tfvars, but it's always better to put it as terraform.tfvars, because this is going to let Terraform know that, oh, it has a default configuration input or default variables input. So this tfvar is a Terraform file that defines the variables, the inputs to the variables. When we get deep into the section, maybe tomorrow, when you write Terraform, you can put a specific value in a Terraform. Let's say, for instance, now you want to deploy an EC2 on the cloud. One parameter that is required for you to deploy an EC2 is the AMI, which we know in a layman language as the operating system. So in the cloud, we call it AMI, which is Amazon Machine Image. So one particular parameter that you need if you want to deploy an EC2 is to specify the AMI that you want to use. And this AMI, you can put it in a particular variables. Variable is just a value where you store is a keyword, or is a particular keyword where you store value, just like the variables in every other application that you declare a variable and you specify a value to it. So if you are using variables in your Terraform configuration file, then if you are using variable in your Terraform configuration file, then you need a particular input values in that variable. Variable lets you change values. So if you don't want to use a specific value all the time, you can specify it in a variable, and anytime you want to change the value, you just change the values of the variable. So if you want to be able to use variable and specify value, default value, then those are what we are going to be putting in your terraform.tf vars. We're going to be looking at this later in the class. Then another Terraform files that you need to know is what is called Terraform. Another file that you need to know is what is called terraform.tf states. .tf states. This .tf state is a file that tracks your configuration. It's a file that tracks your current state of your infrastructure. It tracks the current state of your configuration or of your infrastructure. So whatever infrastructure that you use Terraform to deploy to the cloud, you want to know the current state of that infrastructure. So this .tf state sorry, I don't know, I wasn't showing my screen. One second. Can you guys see my screen now? All right. So the first Terraform file that I talk about is called the .tf. And this .tf, that is where we are going to be putting our main Terraform code. That's where we are going to be putting our main Terraform code. And that is one of the very important, that is even one of the most important file that you have to create if you are using Terraform to deploy an application to the cloud, because this is where you're going to be putting all the code that you write for your configuration or infrastructure deployment. Then the second file is what we refer to as the TF vars. This TF vars is the Terraform file that you will input the values that you want to use for your variables. If you are using variables in your Terraform code to hold a specific value, if you are using variable, then you need to declare, or when you are running the Terraform file, when you are running the Terraform, like Terraform plan or Terraform apply, you need to give values to the variables that you declare. So you can put those values for that variable, or for those variables, you can put those those inputs, you can put them in the terraform.tf vars. This is why, or this is how Terraform, you know that, okay, those variables that you specify, this is their value. So the Terraform will go to this particular file and go and get those values for the variable. The next one that we talked about is the TF state. The TF state is a file that tracks the current states. It tracks the current states of your infrastructure. If you use Terraform to deploy resources in the cloud, you want to know the current state of that resources. So Terraform keeps the current state of whatever you have used Terraform to deploy. It keeps their current state in this in this TF state file. And this is the only way Terraform knows what you have already used it to deploy to the cloud should increase. You want to, what you have already deployed to the cloud, maybe you forgot, and you want to deploy it again, then this TF state file will let Terraform knows that, hey, wait, this thing that you want to redeploy has already been deployed before. So that way, you don't deploy one resources twice. So the next Terraform file that I want to talk about is also the second to this. This is terraform.cf state. Why the one that we want to talk about now is backup. So this particular one is just a backup to the terraform.cf state, because this terraform.cf state is one of the most important Terraform file. And if you accidentally delete this file, Terraform.tf states, if you accidentally delete it, then Terraform will not know what he has already deployed to the cloud. So this is a situation whereby Terraform will want to deploy the same thing again if you have already deployed before. So let's say you already used Terraform to deploy an EC2 to the cloud before, and accidentally you mess up with this Terraform.tl, this TF state file. Is normally called terraform.tf state. It's normally called terraform.tf state. If you delete this, then Terraform will not know that, oh, you have already deployed EC2 in the cloud. Then it will have to deploy it again, because there is no way to track what it has already deployed before. So you want to deploy the same thing again, and you don't want this. So the next one is you don't have to create this file, and you don't have to create both the terraform.cf state and the terraform.backup. The system Terraform automatically creates it when you run Terraform apply. Terraform automatically create that. But there is another one which ends with .terraform, which ends with .hcl. This .hcl is a file that keeps the current version of the Terraform provider that you are using. It keeps the version of the provider that you are using. And if you accidentally specify, when you run Terraform for the first time, the version of that provider will be kept in the terraform.cl. And later in future time, if you want to run Terraform again, possibly Terraform has changed their configuration, and if you go ahead and use a different version, then you might be having difficulties in your Terraform deployment. Terraform will be showing you some error that the version that you are using is not the initial version that they use to deploy the resources to the cloud. So if you don't have the .hcl, then you might encounter that issue. But if you have the .hcl still in your application, then Terraform will go to this file and you go and pick the version that you use initially to deploy the resources to the cloud, and it will download the same resources if you want to modify it in future time. So the final one that we're going to look at is what is called .tf-ignore. This is like the tf-ignore in the Git. If you know how to work with Git, this is like .tf-ignore. If you specify any file in your .tf-ignore, Terraform will ignore that file if you want to do Terraform apply. So these are the most common Terraform scripts, Terraform files that we're going to look at today. There are some other Terraform files which are not really important, but you will find them once in a while in people's code or in some people's repository. And one of them is the .tf.json. If you have this, it's also a valid Terraform file, but it's not as common as the one I listed up here. So let's go ahead and create our first Terraform script. So So now let's create our first Terraform script. Then from there, we jump to the next stage of this section, which is the authentication and authorization in Terraform. And the remaining topic that we are going to cover today, there will not be a particular order. Maybe I will do 2 first, 3, then 4. No, I will just take all of them together. But at the end of the training, we will cover both the authentication, working with provider and resource block, and also this the last one, which is the basic Terraform command. So I'm creating a file called, we already created a file called main.tf. So the first thing that you want to have in your Terraform file is the provider. And this is how Terraform will know that this is the provider that you are working with. This is how Terraform will know that this is the provider that you are working with. And guess what? It will just go and download the repository, the code for that provider. And how do you get this provider? So this now leads us to working with Terraform documentation. So I'm going to open a browser now and put Terraform documentation. You will find it in terraform.io. On this terraform.io, if you want to get to where the documentation is, this is not the documentation, this is not the DOCS, it's not the documentation we are talking about for the provider. To get the documentation for provider, go to the registry. Click on registry. Then once the page load, go to browse providers, because we need documentation for the provider and not for the Terraform as a whole. So here, after you get here, these are all the provider that Terraform has. The first 6 you see here, those are the very common provider. So we're going to be using AWS as our provider. Now that we are on AWS provider. So this is the documentation that you want to open down if you are working with AWS. This is the first documentation that you have to open if you are working with AWS. And now, where do you get the provider? Just click on this use provider. Use provider. And look at this. Let's get this clear. If you are working with, or maybe you are just starting if Terraform, you are just starting to use Terraform for the first time, or maybe you don't have a repository before, maybe nobody has already created Terraform script, you just want to start this from scratch, then you can use provider here. You can use this one because this is the current provider for AWS. But if your company has already been using Terraform before and they already have some resources deployed in Terraform, you just want to clone that repository and you want to modify, or you want to start working with it, then you don't want to use this because this is the current one, except if they specify that you can use it in their code. But what you want to do is to go pull the code that they have in their repository. And once you pull that code, the next thing you want to do, go to the provider. You just locate the provider. You can search for it, locate the provider, and get the version of the provider they are using. If there are any provider they are using, just come to the provider version here. Come to the version, go down, then select the provider here, because this is the only way you can get the same documentation as the documentation that they used to create those resources that was pushed to the repository. Because if you are using this provider and you are using the documentation that you see here, that means you are using the latest provider documentation. And this might not work correctly with the provider they use. Just imagine if your company have been running Terraform for some years, and maybe they are using version 3.64, and you want to go ahead and downloaded version 5.23. That is a lot of different version. That is what is called a major version change, a major version difference. So you don't want to do that. But for now, we don't have any Terraform code before, so I'm good to use the current or the latest version. So I'm going to copy this and put it in my Terraform my main.tf files. So this is all I just need to do. And now I need to provide some configurations options for my Terraform scripts. These configuration options, I'm going to show you where you can get whatever you need to put here. So let's go back to the Terraform scripts. Terraform documentation. So now that we've copied the Terraform providers, and that one is set already, then click on the documentations. So you can now see this is our documentation. And if you look at this first this first line on the documentation, you see AWS providers. And if you look at the heading, this is AWS provider. So what does that tell you? Is that anything that you want to put in your provider here, under here, anything that you want to put here, you will find them in this first page. So if you scroll down on this first page, you will see this is configuration provider. They gave us an example. So you can copy the whole of this, or you copy the one that is here. But look at this provider. There are some other options that you can also put here, apart from the regions. If you scroll down, look at it here. AWS configuration reference. So anything you are seeing under this provider, you can as well put them under as well put them here. So if you want to put anything here, just go and look for it under the provider. If it is not under that provider, then you cannot put it in the Terraform provider section. So for example, let's look at region. So if you want to specify your region, just click region. Okay, let me put this side by side so that I don't just go off the screen. I hope you guys can still see. Let me know in the comment section if you can still see the two screen and if it looks good. So if you scroll down, look at it, the regions. So if I copy this region, I can put the region here. Then I just need to do equals to, then specify the value. What happens to access key 2? If I'm using an access key, I can also put an access key there. And this is why some people put their access key here, access key and secret key. But I'm totally against putting access key and secret key here, because you might accidentally forgot and you push it to your repository. You don't want to do this. It's better to keep your access key or your credential away from this place. And I'll show you alternative or a better place to put the credential. Then look at the secret key. So you can also copy the secret key and put the secret key there, then specify the value. So look at token 2. We can also have our tokens there. And then specify the values. All these values, you will get it directly from your AWS account. And if you, let me open this, let me show you something here. If you scroll up, it will also tell you that if you don't want to put that value directly in your provider's configuration, you can also set the value as an environment variable. You can set the value as an environment variable. And this now leads me to let's go back to let's connect to our AWS account and let's get those values. So I already signed into my AWS account. So yesterday we set up our AWS account, and we set up an IAM Identity Center. So I'm going to go to the IAM Identity Center now, copy the URL of the Identity Center. So this is the URL of the Identity Center. I'm just going to copy it, and I'm going to open. So because I already have VS Code, to open this IAM, and I don't want to, if I should go to this Identity Center, it's going to override this this login that I have here. I want to log in. Let me sign out first. I want to log in as a different user. So this current user is the root user. I don't want to deploy resources using the root user. So I want to sign in now as an IAM user. So for me to do that, I need to get the credentials of that IAM user. And the IAM user that I want to use is called Terraform. So I need to get the credentials of this Terraform. And if you are using IAM Identity Center, it will provide you a URL where all your users, all your IAM users can log in from, the URL they can use to log in. And that is the URL I copied here, and I paste the URL here. Then I just need to provide my credentials for the Terraform users. So the first credential that I need to put is the username. So when I put the username, then I need to put the password. So 1 second, let me put my password. So now I've connected as the IAM user. So from now, I'll be using this user. So I can go off this and just add this here, but I will still have to be toggling between two different browsers. So what I just need to do, the current account that they gave me access to, or the Terraform have access to, is just this one account. And if you open that one account, if you click down this drop down arrow, you will see the access or the permission sets that the Terraform has access to. If you want to go directly to the console, you can just click manage by console. Or if you want to generate access key, which is you want to use command line or you want to use programmatic access, click on the next one, and it's going to provide you this information. So these are where I'm going to get my access key from. So the first thing, I just want to copy this, or we can use this, and let's use this one. So you can see this is where I get my access key. I'm going to copy this first access key, then go back to my Terraform configuration file, put the access key here, then copy the second one, put it here, and copy the token. Copy the token. Let me enlarge this. Copy the token and put it here. So that is a long token, but that is fine. It will work. So this is my configuration. And as you guys can see that this looks helpful. And apart from the appearance, how it looks, one mistake that you can do is after you finish writing your Terraform code and you want to push to the repository, you might as well push all of these to your repository. And if that goes to your repository, then that is a no-no, because somebody can scan your repository and see that you have a secret key there, and they can make use of that secret key. So because of this, I'm not going to be putting my credential here. I'm going to remove it. And if you are working in an environment that maybe you already use the other method of configuration and you are not getting it, it's not working for you, yeah, it's fine to put your configuration file here, just make sure that before you push to your repository, make sure you delete it. All right. So, but I'm not going to be putting my home for here now. So the region that I want to use is called US East 1. So another method, this is the first method of authenticating, by putting the credentials directly in the first method of authenticating is putting the credentials directly in your Terraform file. But the second method of authenticating is by putting the credentials in the .aws folder. I will show you that when you go to your Terraform, go to a terminal, and if you do AWS configure, when you run this code, AWS will ask you, okay, what are the credentials? So you can put the access key. Let's get our access key again. So we're going to, for the access key again, this is the access key. I'm just going to paste it here, press enter. It's going to ask you what is the secret access key. Then I'm going to go to the next one, put it here, press enter. And now look at it, it's not asking me for the token. So that is an issue there. So, but I'm going to show you how you can add the token later. But let's just continue and fill this questionnaire first. So now it's asking us what regions do we want to use. I'm going to put US East 1, and it's asking me what is the default output format. The default output format is JSON. So, and now our configuration is fine. So this is the second configuration that you can do. The third configuration, which is, the third means of authenticating, is by using variables. Is by using variables. And how do you know how to, or what variable key that you will use to put your to configure your system? If you go back to our initial Terraform folder, Terraform documentation, look at it. This is variables. So if you want to use variables, this is how you are going to configure your variables. And if you look at the variable environment, you say access for your for your AWS access key ID. This is how you should set it. So if I go back here now, let me just set it here, then I'm going to copy it later. It said for this access key ID, this is going to be our access key. For AWS secret key, this is what you should use. For the token, this is what you should use. And if you go down, it also gives us the other informations too. And for region, it says use AWS region. And you can see that all of this, you just need to work with documentation. Everything you need is already inside the documentation. Now, I have everything also. You can see I have my region, I have my token, I have my access key, and I have my key ID. And all of this information, you can get them directly from here. And this is one good thing about using Identity Center. You don't have to configure them by yourself like this. You can just, because it's already been configured for you, all you just need to do is to copy. Look at it here. This is Mac. I'm not using Mac or Linux. I'm using Windows. But if you want to set your environment variable, after you specify the value, let me first specify those values. Put the value here, value for this one, and value for this one. And for the purpose of time, I will not put values for the token because it's going to occupy a lot of space. And the value for region is US61. Now look at it. Let me just say this is the value. And if I want to set this manually myself, all I just need to do, if I'm using window and I want to set the environment variables for window, I just need to do set, and set. So this is going to set an environment variable for the current user. If you want to set the same environment variable for the system, then that is when you're going to be asking X here. But we are not doing that for this training. And so I'm just going to limit it to just the first one, set. And this is me manually configure this myself. So all I just need to do is to copy the first one, copy the first line, and paste it in your terminal. Copy the first one, paste it in your terminal. Copy the second one, paste it in your terminal, and copy the last one and do the remaining like that. But instead of us manually doing it ourselves, I'm going to unset this. If you already set a value and you want to remove that value, just do unset. Then it's going to remove it from your variables. Unset. So instead of you manually doing it yourself, what you can do is just copy, because the IAM Identity Center has already provided for you. So if I'm using window, I just need to go to window, or if I'm using PowerShell, just go to PowerShell, but I'm using window, I'll just go to window and look at it here. All of them are here, set. So I'm just going to put my mouse on it and copy. So immediately you copy, paste it here, go to your window and just paste it. It's giving me error. It doesn't want me to paste it that way, but I just show you how you can paste it. So it's going to set that as an environment variable. Let me go to PowerShell. I don't know why that one is giving me error, because it doesn't want me to paste it. So you can see for PowerShell. So let's try PowerShell. Copy for PowerShell and paste. You can see PowerShell go successfully, and that is how I set it. That is all you need to do. So if you start running your Terraform script now, you have already authenticated. This is another means of authenticating. Now let me take you back to the first one that we did. I like using bash instead of PowerShell, so that is why I switch back to bash. But if you like PowerShell, you can continue using PowerShell. If you don't know how to set your terminal to use either PowerShell or bash, you might as well go and watch our Linux video. There was one of our Linux video that will teach you how to set your terminal to use either bash or PowerShell. So I'm going to clear this screen. Now, if you remember that when we are doing AWS configure, it's not there was one of them that it does not allow us to put there because there is no space for it. I mean, it doesn't give us any keyword for it, and that is the token. So if you want to also do the token, this is what you can do. Look at when you run AWS configure, AWS is going to create a file called when you want AWS configure, it's going to create a file called .aws. It's going to create that file inside .aws, and the name of the file actually is two files. The first one is called credential. It's going to create two files. The first file is called credentials, and the second file is called configs. And these two files will be created inside a folder called .aws. And this folder is always in your home directory, the current user, whichever user that run the Terraform config, any user that run Terraform config, AWS configure, any user that run this AWS configure, and you can see the current user is this user here, the Cornelis Inc. So inside this, the Cornelis Inc. home directory is going to create a file called .aws. A folder called .aws. And that folder, inside that folder, two files will be created. One is called credential, and the second will be called config. So you can manually go to this file and modify it. Now let's go to the file. And I believe you know how to open a file in Linux. Remember, if you don't know, just go and watch our Linux video that we have in our playlist. You will see how to view and modify a file. So this file now, I can go to the file by doing, open the file by doing VI. Okay, let's quickly do, before we even view the file or modify the file, let's see the file first. So if I do ls and put my tida, and you guys should remember, or if you don't know, go and watch that Linux video. If you do tida, that means you are referring to the current user's home directory. So I repeat that. If you use tida, that means you are referring to the current user's home directory, and it's the same thing as you specifying. It's the same thing as you specifying something like this /current user, and my current user is this, the Cornelis. So it's the same thing as you saying c:/current user, the Cornelis. So, but I'm not going to write that long words. I'll just stick with tida. And now that I stick with tida, if I do /, so every folder inside that, inside that the C drive, the file, the folder that I want to specifically reference here is called .aws. And let's see what are the files inside this .aws. You can see there are two files there, which is config and credentials. So when you are running AWS configure and AWS is asking for your credentials, AWS is storing those credentials in these two files, and you can look at them by doing cat. Let's look at the first one by doing, let's first look at credentials. Look at it. This is the credential that we configure the other time. And you can see that if you remember that we were able to only configure access key ID and then the secret. We are unable to configure the token, but we will need the token. So we need to modify this file so that we can add our tokens. So to modify it, just do vi. Now it's opened up for me, so I can modify the token now. But instead of just modifying it, you know what? I will just paste a new file there. So I'm just going to delete everything that is there, then go back to where I'm getting my credentials from. So this is my credentials here. If I go back to the window and I can just copy the whole of this, you can see it. That is why it specifies manually add a profile to your AWS credentials file. So the profile that I want to add to my AWS credential file is all of this. So I'm just going to copy them, then go back to my file and just paste it there. So this is how it looks. So I'm just going to save this file, and that is me configuring my system. So because when I ran AWS configure, I was unable to put the tokens. So what I did now is to go directly inside that file where the information are stored and modify it myself. So now let's look at the second file. which is called the config file. And you can see the config file only have the defaults and the region, but the user I'm using currently is not default. I have a username, and the username is called the it's called the F3. Let me go to this. I'm going to copy this out because it's not letting me being able to point it to it very well. So I'm going to copy this out. Then let me put it here so that I can copy paste. So this is the user. This is the user that I want to reference. This is the profile that I want to reference. So I'm copying that profile. Go back to my, okay, it disappeared. Let me open it again. So I'm going to replace that profile, the default, I'm going to replace it with the profile that I copied. So for me to do this, I need to be able to modify this file. Click vi, then the default, I want to change that default to this user that the profile that I copied. The profile, I thought I copied it. Let me copy it again. So this time around, I just put it in a notepad. This time around, I just put it in a notepad, then I can copy it. Because it doesn't copy the other time that I thought I copied it. So I'm going to put that here, and don't make sure that you have a bracket around it. First bracket, second bracket, so that it turns to green. And now I can now save it because my region is US is 1, that is still fine. And the output that I specify is called JSON, and that is still fine. So I'm going to save this. And now I have successfully configured my scripts, my Terraform environment. So I can start running Terraform code now, because this is the first thing you need to do. If you don't configure your environment, Terraform will be rejecting your code, because that means you don't have access to deploy resources to the cloud. So I'm going to clear all of this. I don't need them again. And now my Terraform looks good. Other thing that you might want to do, if it's giving you issue, you might also want to specify the provider that you used. The provider that you use, you might specify it here as well. If let me say this. If you use default, remember where we go to change default in the config file. If what you have there is default and that is what you want to use, then you don't need to come and change or modify this. It's okay. If AWS, if you want Terraform, it's going to go to the config file, and if you see default there, you will just use that default configuration. But if you don't want to use default, you want to use a specific profile, then you have to specify the profile here. And the profile that I'm using is this. So that is everything that you just need to do. This is good to go to your, if you want to push this to the repository, that is fine. But if you don't want, or if you don't want, you can also remove it. It doesn't really matter. But what you should not push to your repository is the access key, key ID, and your token. Those three should not go to your repository. And I will show you another ways later in the class how to keep all these secrets totally away from your file. All right, so we've deployed, we've created we've authenticate our environment. So the next thing for us to quickly do before we go for today is to deploy, work with providers. We already work with providers. It's just to work with the resource block. If you are creating Terraform puts the majority of their resources deployment you specify it in a block, and you can see this is our provider block. Terraform works with block. This is our provider block. Then the next block that we want to work with is called resources block. And to specify the resources block, let's go back to the AWS, the Terraform documentation. I work a lot with Terraform documentation. So whichever resources that you want to deploy, EC2, S3, RDS, VPC, whatever it is, you will find their documentation here. Let's say we want to work with VPC, for instance. If you just go here, just specify VPC, and if you look here, so VPC is directly under S3, under EC2. If you go to EC2, you will see VPC. No, it's not under, I'm sorry, it's not under VPC. Just search for it. Let's see VPC. But we surely see it here. Okay, it's by itself, VPC. It's not under EC2. But on AWS is on AWS CLI is going to be under EC2. But on Terraform, it has a standalone documentation. So if you look, these are the resources block or different resources blocks you can configure with VPC. So what I want to do is just to create a VPC. So you see AWS VPC. If you want to create a subnet, it's going to be AWS subnet. If you want to create a route table, it's going to be AWS route table. And from tomorrow, we are going to be seeing how you can create multiple resources together. But for now, let's just work with AWS VPC. And now this is the block for AWS VPC. Always try as much as possible to just copy the basic, then modify it instead of you writing the code from scratch by yourself. So I'm going to copy this one, which is the basic usage with tag. If you don't want tag, you can use this basic usage. So I'm going to copy that, put that in my Terraform file, and just change it. If I don't want to use this CIDR block, if you don't know AWS VPC and you don't know CIDR block, you can as well join our January batch training. We train people on AWS Solution Architect, Security Engineer, and AWS Cloud Engineer as well. So I'm going to use the default. If you don't want to use the default, you can just use, I can use .10.0/16. So with this, I'm just specifying this is my CIDR block, and the tag is going to be, I'm going to call this one, let's give it a better name, like managed with Terraform, just to be more clear. So this is me specifying my resources, and if I want to specify subnet, I just need to go to the subnet documentation as well, which is going to be subnet documentation. When I click on that, then you can see the basic. You can as well copy the basic, then go back to the documentation. Go back to your Terraform file. Below that, put your subnet here, and try as much as possible to put comments in your file so that people can know what a particular block is. So this block is going to be for VPC, and this block is going to be for subnet. So you can see my VPC only require me to specify a CRD a CIDR block, but now the subnet is requesting for a VPC ID. So I'm going to comment this house, and from tomorrow, because time has gone already, so from tomorrow we'll start working with different blocks together. There are some blocks that they call them dependent block. You have to create a particular block before you create them. An example of that is subnet, because you cannot create a subnet if the VPC is not already created. So I'm going to comment this out. It's not that I cannot create the two of them together. If I want to create them together, I just need to specify the name of the VPC that I want to use. And I'll start showing you from that. I'll start showing you that from tomorrow. So I'm going to comment out this. Anything you comment, Terraform will not run it. You will just see it as if it's just for instruction. So this is my Terraform files. Then what I need to do now is just to run Terraform plan. The first thing you need to do is to do Terraform init so that Terraform can initialize the environment. Terraform init. So if you look at it, we do the only file we have is the main file. So immediately we run Terraform init. Terraform will look at our provider, like, hey, which provider are these people using? Then it will go and download the plugin for that provider. And you can see here, it says initializing provider plugins. And immediately, it also downloaded .terraform, which is the folder where we have the provider plugin. And after this, we check our backend configuration, check our credentials, like, hey, how do we specify our backup? And if everything is fine, you just say successful. And you can see this is one of the files that we specify, we talked about, the file that ends with .hcl. If you open that file, you will see inside that file, we have our provider version. And this is how Terraform specify the version that we are using. And in case, in future time, maybe Terraform now has 10.1.1 version, we can still download provider for this particular version by specifying it in our providers blog. So after these two steps, all I just need to do now is to run Terraform plan and make sure that to know what Terraform is going to do before I give Terraform go ahead to deploy it in my environment. So I'm going to do Terraform plan. Always do Terraform plan before you apply, because it will tell you what Terraform will do in your environment, what Terraform will deploy. Because at times you might think that, oh, you are perfect, you are running things, it's working fine, and if you just do Terraform apply directly, it might go ahead and terminate a critical mission application or infrastructure, which you don't want to do. And this is what Terraform says. Say, hey, if I go to your environment, these are what I'm going to do. I'm going to set the CIDR block to 10.10.0.0/16. Then I'm also going to declare all of these, but the value for them is currently unknown, and I'm going to know the value after I apply, after you run Terraform apply. Then you also know the enabled DNS support, that one is true. So any value that you declare, or they are defaults and Terraform know them, it will specify those values immediately before you apply. While the other value that you do not specify and Terraform do not know until it is created, then it's going to say unknown, known after apply. It will say known after apply. So everything is fine. I'll just do Terraform plan. Terraform apply. And you can see the second file, which is the .tf state. Terraform now download the .tf state for us. So Terraform still come back to make sure that whatever you said you want to do by running Terraform apply is exactly what you want to do. Then you confirm it like, yes, go ahead and deploy this. And Terraform will go and deploy it. Look at it, it says one added. 0 change, and 0 destroy. So if you go now to our AWS account, and okay, sorry, go to the AWS account. I'm going to open this wide. This is the account. If you go under VPC, you will see the resources that we just deployed. Because what we deploy is VPC. Then when you click on the VPC, the name for our Terraform is called, the name that we use is called Terraform Managed. You can see the name is Terraform Managed. So let's go and look for a VPC that is named Terraform Managed. Look at it here. So this is us using Terraform to deploy resources directly to our AWS account. I will stop the class here, and we're going to continue from here tomorrow. So we continue from here tomorrow, and on tomorrow's class, we are going to go deeper into using Terraform. So tomorrow we're going to be learning about Terraform variables, Terraform outputs, and we're also going to learn more about Terraform resource block, and we will use Terraform to start deploying real-life applications directly in the cloud. If you have a question for me, you can start posting it in the chat. Any question, post it in the chat. Post it in the comment box. All right. If there is no question for me, I just want to say thank you guys for coming, and thank you for joining us for this training. And ensure to be here tomorrow and for the next part of the training. This training is going to run for the next 8 days. There won't be lecture. There won't be training on Sunday, but we're going to have training Wednesday to Thursday, and also continue tomorrow. Continue next week. If you enjoyed this training, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please press the notification bell and help us to share the link, and let's get the channel going. Thank you guys. See you tomorrow.